For 30 years, I cooked, cleaned, and cared for people who never once asked how I was doing. I kept telling myself that motherhood meant sacrifice, that being quiet was the same as being strong. But the truth is, silence can kill you. The night it all fell apart, I was pouring wine when my son said, "You know, Mom, maybe you should take it easy with all this old-fashioned stuff. Olivia says your methods are outdated." I froze. Everyone laughed, even Olivia, who owed me everything. I forced a smile, but my heart was screaming. I realized I'd spent my whole life giving to people who saw me as furniture, useful but replaceable. That night, something changed. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just knew it was over. And that quiet decision would become the loudest revenge they'd ever hear. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. The table was full that evening, my son Ethan at the head, Olivia beside him, and their friends around the table. It was supposed to be a family dinner, something warm and comforting, like the old days when Ethan was still a boy who used to kiss my cheek after every meal. But now, he looked through me. I was just the woman who made sure the roast didn't burn, the glasses stayed full, the napkins were ironed. He didn't see the mother who stayed up every night to keep their life together when his father left. He didn't see the woman who worked double shifts so he could go to college. As laughter bounced around the room, I noticed something I hadn't before, the way they never spoke to me, only around me. Olivia was telling her friends about her new business venture, some lifestyle brand she'd started with Ethan's money. She kept saying things like, "Our vision, our team, our success," while Ethan smiled proudly as if he had built something real. I knew better. I'd seen the bills, the debt, the fake investors, but I kept my mouth shut, as I always did. Then Olivia looked at me and said, "Oh, and Margaret, don't worry about dessert this time. We ordered something special. You don't have to stress yourself in the kitchen like always." She smiled, but it wasn't kindness, it was pity. I nodded and stepped back, hands clasped in front of my apron. One of Olivia's friends, a woman maybe half her age, full of self-importance, looked me up and down and whispered, "She still wears aprons? That's so old school." The others chuckled. Olivia didn't stop them. She leaned back in her chair, sipping wine like a queen, watching me with that look, the one that said, "You belong in the background." I excused myself quietly and walked into the kitchen. My legs were trembling, but not from anger, from the kind of sadness that makes your bones ache. I leaned against the counter and stared at my hands. These were the same hands that had held Ethan when he was sick, that had built everything he now took for granted, and now they were shaking like they didn't know where to go. From the dining room, I heard Olivia's voice again. "Ethan, we should really renovate the kitchen. It's too old-fashioned. Don't you think it's time for something new?" He laughed. "Yeah, I guess it's about time. Mom's style hasn't changed since the 90s. More laughter. Something inside me went quiet. You know that silence before a storm? That's what it felt like. A calm so deep it almost scared me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I walked back into the dining room with my head held higher than I felt in years. They didn't even notice me at first. When I spoke, my voice came out steady. "I'm glad you're enjoying dinner. I hope it's everything you wanted." Olivia smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a child who's overstayed their welcome. "It's lovely, Margaret. Thank you. We'll handle the cleanup. You've done enough." You've done enough. That line echoed in my head like a bell. I had done enough, more than enough. I'd given my life to people who couldn't even see me anymore. I nodded and turned around and walked out. I didn't go to my room. I didn't cry in the bathroom like before. I went straight to the living room, sat down, and stared at the family photos on the wall. Every frame told the same lie, smiling faces pretending to belong together. I thought about all the birthdays I planned, all the holidays I spent alone in the kitchen while everyone else opened gifts. I thought about Ethan's wedding day when Olivia didn't want me in the front row because it would ruin the aesthetic. And I thought about how I said nothing every time. That night, after they went to bed, I packed one small suitcase, just the essentials, clothes, some cash I'd been hiding for emergencies, and an old photo of Ethan when he was still my little boy. I stood by the door, holding my keys. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from freedom. Before I left, I placed the house key on the kitchen counter. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? They wouldn't understand anyway. As I stepped outside, the night air hit my face, cold and clean. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The house behind me, the one I built with my hands, didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum full of strangers. I looked up at the sky, at the faint stars above the streetlights, and whispered to myself, "You've done enough." And in that moment, I meant it. I didn't know where I was going or what would come next, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of being alone. I was scared of never finding myself again, and I wasn't about to let that happen. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed after 30 years of being treated like a ghost, or would you have walked away too, even if it meant starting from nothing? Because that night, I chose nothing, and it became the start of everything. The street was empty when I stepped out that night. The only sound was the low hum of distant traffic and the soft click of my shoes against the pavement. I didn't take the car. I didn't want to. That house, that driveway, every inch of that place carried too many memories, too much of me. I wanted to feel the ground under my feet again, to remind myself I was still real. It was close to midnight when I reached the bus stop. My suitcase sat by my side, old and faded, just like the life I was leaving behind. The bus driver looked at me, confused, maybe even a little concerned. A woman my age, alone at that hour, it wasn't something he saw every day. "Where you headed?" he asked. I hesitated. I didn't know. I said, "Anywhere but here." He nodded, like he understood. When the bus pulled away, I watched the lights of my neighborhood fade in the rearview mirror. For 30 years, I'd watched over others. Now, for once, I was watching over myself. The ride felt endless. My body was tired, but my mind was awake, alive, restless. Every bump in the road shook loose another memory. Ethan's first steps, his first heartbreak, the night I worked 2 jobs to keep our home after his father left. I remembered every meal, every smile, every sacrifice that meant nothing to him in the end. And yet, as painful as it was, I couldn't hate him. Not yet. That was the worst part. When the bus finally stopped in the city, the air smelled different, sharper, colder, almost judgmental. I found a small motel near the bus station. The room was tiny, a single bed, peeling wallpaper, a flickering bulb. But it was mine. No voices, no laughter at my expense, no Olivia watching me like I was some relic from the past. Just silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The weight of everything hit me at once. The years I'd lost, the people I'd lived for, the home that no longer wanted me. I cried for hours, the kind of crying that doesn't make noise, but leaves you shaking. I cried until the sun started to rise through the dusty blinds. The next morning, I went out and found a small apartment for rent above a bakery. The walls were cracked and the plumbing made strange noises, but it smelled like bread every morning, and that made it feel alive. The landlord, a kind older woman named Mrs. Patel,
handed me the keys with a gentle smile. She said, "It's not much, but it's peaceful." Peaceful. I hadn't heard that word in years. The first few weeks were hard. I didn't know what to do with my time. I'd spent decades cooking, cleaning, and caring for others, and now I didn't have anyone to serve. I'd wake up early out of habit, make breakfast for one, and sit at the table staring at the empty chair across from me. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. But underneath it, there was something else, the faint, fragile sound of peace. I started walking around the city just to fill the hours. I'd watch people rush to work, couples argue at crosswalks, children tug at their parents' hands. Life went on, whether or not I was part of it. Sometimes I'd sit in a park and watch the pigeons gather, wondering if any of them had ever lost everything and still kept flying. At night, I'd write in an old notebook, not letters to anyone, just thoughts, the kind of thoughts I'd never said out loud. I was more than what they saw. I existed before their needs. I'm still here. The words were messy, uneven, but they felt like breaths, proof that I was still alive. One afternoon, about 2 months after I left, I saw Ethan's name on the local news. Olivia's company had been featured in a lifestyle segment, smiling and posing in their modern house, my house, talking about family values and success. My stomach turned. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. Grief for the lie they were still living. I turned off the TV and went for a walk. The sky was gray, heavy with rain, and for once, I didn't care if I got wet. The world felt raw, stripped of pretenses, just like me. When I got back, there was an envelope waiting outside my door. My name was written in neat cursive. No return address. Inside was a letter, the kind written on old stationery paper, the ink slightly faded. It was from Aunt Ruth, my mother's sister, the one we'd lost contact with decades ago. The letter began simply, "Margaret, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but there's something you deserve to know. Something your parents were never told, something I couldn't keep to myself any longer. You were switched at birth."
I stared at the words, reading them over and over again. Switched at birth. I thought it was a mistake, some cruel prank, but as I kept reading, the details lined up. The hospital, the dates, the mix-up between 2 baby girls born the same night. Aunt Ruth had spent years trying to confirm it, but she was dying now, and this was her final confession. My hands were trembling. My entire life, the family I'd known, the son I'd raised, the home I sacrificed everything for, suddenly felt like a borrowed script from someone else's story. The letter ended with a single line. "The truth won't fix the past, but it might free you from it." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker, my thoughts running wild. Who was I really? Where did I belong? And if everything I'd lived for wasn't mine to begin with, what did I owe anyone now? For the first time in my life, the chains that held me, guilt, duty, silence, started to loosen. I wasn't the woman they thought I was. I wasn't even the woman I thought I was. I was something in between, someone about to wake up. Be honest with me. If you found out your whole life was built on a lie, would you want to know the truth? Or would you rather live in ignorance, even if it meant staying blind forever? Because I was about to find out that the truth doesn't just set you free, it burns everything that kept you trapped. It had been 3 weeks since Emily last saw Ethan, 3 weeks of silence that felt heavier than 30 years of marriage. She'd started to find rhythm in her new life, mornings filled with the scent of cheap coffee, afternoons at the small park nearby where she'd sit and feed the pigeons, and nights where she'd fall asleep with the TV humming in the background, pretending it was company.
But peace is a fragile thing. It breaks the moment truth decides to knock. It happened on a gray Tuesday morning. Emily had just returned from a walk when the building's old superintendent, Mr. Dales, waved her down with a stack of mail. Among the usual bills and leaflets was one envelope that looked different. Cream-colored, heavy, with a faded hospital logo on the corner. The sender, St. Bartholomew Medical Records Department. Emily frowned. St. Bartholomew? That was where she'd given birth to their son, Michael, 30 years ago. Her heart began to race. She hadn't seen that name in decades. She tore the envelope open, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter written in careful professional language. Dear Mrs. Harper, during an audit of historical patient records, our department discovered a documentation discrepancy relating to the birth records from May 1995. It appears that an error may have occurred involving the identification tags of 2 newborns. We recommend that you contact the hospital administration to discuss this matter further. Emily froze. Her vision blurred. She read the paragraph again and again, as if repetition could force it to make sense. Her breath hitched. An error involving 2 newborns? The paper slipped from her hand, landing softly on the carpet. She stood there for a long time, not moving, not breathing, until her body reminded her she had to sit. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed into the small wooden chair by the window. Memories began to unspool. The hospital room, the exhaustion, the nurse who'd taken the baby for weighing, the hours she'd slept through afterwards. The possibility clawed at her mind like something alive. No, that can't be. But curiosity and dread are twins that grow together. That night, she couldn't sleep. The letter burned in her mind until she finally dialed the number printed at the bottom. The next morning, she was sitting in the hospital's administration office. The place smelled of disinfectant and old paper, exactly like the day she'd given birth. The administrator, a woman in her 40s, with a sympathetic expression, ushered her in. Mrs. Harper, thank you for coming. We understand this must be difficult to hear. Just tell me what happened, Emily said quietly, her voice trembling but steady. The woman opened a file. 30 years ago, 2 male infants were born within 5 minutes of each other. During the transfer from delivery to the nursery, their identification tags were mismatched. We discovered it during a digital audit. According to our findings, she hesitated, eyes flicking up, your biological son was not raised by you. The words didn't hit all at once. They landed piece by piece, like shards of glass. My son? Yes, and the child you raised, Michael, biologically belongs to another family. The records show the other mother's name was Olivia Carter. Emily's breath left her body in one long exhale. Olivia! The name rolled through her mind like thunder. Her husband's mistress. The woman who'd sat across from her at that dinner table, smirking, pretending to win. Her chest constricted. The room began to tilt. She clutched the edge of the desk. You're telling me my husband's lover was raising my son? The administrator's lips parted slightly, shocked. We don't have that information, Mrs. Harper, but the birth records match. Your biological son was listed as Baby Carter. Emily stood up abruptly. I need their address. I need to see him. I'm sorry, she said softly. That information is confidential, but you can submit a request for contact through our legal department. She walked out without another word.
Outside, the world felt too bright, too loud. She stood on the hospital steps, her heart breaking all over again, not for herself this time, but for the boy she never knew, the child she'd never held. That night, she dug through old boxes until she found Michael's baby photos, his smile,
His eyes, his small fingers clutching hers. Everything she'd believed, every memory, every sacrifice began to unravel. For hours, she cried silently, not out of weakness, but out of mourning for the 30 years stolen from her. And when her tears finally dried, something else rose inside her, something sharper. Resolve. She realized, with a bitter, trembling laugh, that Ethan had cheated her long before he ever slept with Olivia. Fate had been conspiring behind her back since the day her son was born. But now, she knew. And knowledge for Emily Harper was no longer a burden. It was a weapon. The next morning, she pulled out her old laptop and began to dig. Hospital archives, local records, business directories, every digital trail she could find. And within a few hours, she saw the confirmation she didn't want, but couldn't look away from. Olivia Carter, married to Ethan Harper 6 years ago. Their family photo appeared in a real estate article titled, "Ethan and Olivia Harper, the power couple behind Harper Estates." And there, smiling between them, was a young man with dark eyes and familiar features. Her son. Her real son. The blood drained from her face. She stared at the screen, whispering, "You took my child and built your empire on my life?" That night, Emily didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply began to plan. Because this time, she wasn't just fighting for revenge. She was reclaiming 30 years of motherhood and every stolen heartbeat that came with it. Revenge didn't start with fire for Emily. It started with silence, the kind that waits, the kind that sharpens. For weeks, she built her plan piece by piece, quietly, deliberately, like someone who had finally learned the value of patience. 30 years of obedience had made her invisible to Ethan. That invisibility was now her armor. Her first step was simple: learn everything about Harper Estates, the company Ethan and Olivia had built together. It wasn't hard. Olivia loved publicity. Every article, every photo shoot, every interview spoke of their fairy tale partnership. Emily almost laughed. Fairy tales always end with the witch being burned, she thought. She created a fake online identity, Clara Weston, a real estate consultant from Chicago. She started messaging small contractors and ex-employees of Harper Estates, asking for insight on the company culture. Within days, she had more than insight. She had stories. Stories of unpaid invoices, tax irregularities, hidden accounts, and a quiet rumor that Olivia had been falsifying property valuations to inflate profits. Emily took notes, archived files, and built her case. Not for the police. Not yet. This revenge needed to cut deeper, not just through law, but through pride. She rented a small workspace in the city, using her savings. Each wall was covered in printed photos: Ethan's business meetings, Olivia's charity galas, their son's college events. Red strings connected names, dates, companies, and headlines. It looked like madness, but for Emily, it was order. At night, she practiced conversations in the mirror, testing her voice, her smile, her confidence. Gone was the timid tone that once trembled when Ethan raised his voice. Now, her reflection met her gaze like an equal. The second step came unexpectedly. One evening, while scrolling through a local business newsletter, she saw an announcement: Harper Estates to host charity gala for orphans and single mothers. All proceeds go to Harper Foundation. She stared at the headline until her lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. Orphans and single mothers, how poetic, she whispered. That night, she bought a ticket. The gala was held at a luxury hotel downtown, chandeliers dripping with crystals, champagne glasses glittering under the lights. Everyone there looked expensive and hollow. When she walked in, no one recognized her. The years of sadness had changed her face. The soft lines of grief had sharpened into calm authority. Dressed in a sleek black gown and subtle jewelry, Emily Harper looked like she belonged among them. Across the room, she saw him. Ethan. Gray now, heavier, but still carrying that same air of self-importance. Beside him stood Olivia, elegant, polished, her smile the kind that demanded attention. And next to them, her son. Her breath caught. He looked so much like her. The same eyes, the same chin. He was laughing, unaware that his real mother stood only a few steps away. She forced herself to turn away. Not yet. When Olivia stepped on stage to deliver her speech, Emily's hands didn't shake. She simply waited for her cue. The moment Olivia started bragging about helping mothers find homes, her fingers tapped the small Bluetooth button hidden in her purse. Seconds later, the massive screen behind Olivia flickered. The image glitched, then changed. A slideshow began playing. Emails, invoices, hidden ledgers, property reports marked fraudulent, all signed by Olivia Carter.
Gasps rippled through the crowd. Olivia froze mid-sentence, her confident smile collapsing into horror. Ethan turned sharply toward the screen, his face draining of color. The murmurs grew louder. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Is this real?" Emily slipped away before the chaos peaked. She walked calmly through the lobby, past the glass doors, out into the cool night air. Her heart pounded, but her face was serene. She didn't need to stay and watch them burn. The fire had already been lit. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Real estate power couple under investigation for financial misconduct. Charity gala turned scandalous as private files leak publicly. By noon, Harper Estates' website went offline. Investors pulled out. Olivia disappeared from social media. Ethan's phone records were subpoenaed. Emily watched it all unfold from her apartment, a cup of coffee in her hand, a quiet smile on her lips. But there was one thing left unfinished, one conversation she needed before her revenge could rest. 3 days later, she waited in the parking lot outside Ethan's office. When he finally stepped out, looking worn and hollow, she called out his name. He froze, slowly turned, his face twisted with disbelief. "Emily?" She stepped closer, her voice calm but sharp. "You took everything from me. My marriage, my peace, my child." Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. "I used to wonder what I did wrong, why you fell out of love, why I wasn't enough. But now I see it wasn't me. It was you, always hungry, always lying, even when you didn't have to." He swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" Emily tilted her head. "Nothing. You already gave me what I needed. The truth. And it's your turn to live with it." As she walked away, he called after her, breaking his voice. "Emily, wait! What did you do?" She didn't need to answer. She didn't need to. The world would tell him soon enough. That night, when she opened her laptop, she saw one final headline. Harper Estates declares bankruptcy amid legal storm. Founders under federal investigation. She stared at it for a long time, her eyes wet, but steady.
It wasn't joy she felt, not exactly. It was release. For the first time in her life, Emily Harper was free from their shadows. But freedom has a strange silence after revenge. And in that silence, she began to feel something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in decades. Hope. When the dust settled, the world had already moved on from Ethan and Olivia's fall, but Emily hadn't. For her, the noise outside was just an echo of something deeper inside her. Peace mixed with pain, liberation tangled with grief. Revenge had freed her, but it had also emptied her. She found herself sitting in her apartment one quiet morning, sunlight cutting soft lines across the worn wooden floor, a cup of tea in her hands, steam rising like ghosts of her past. The chaos, the fear, the humiliation. It all seemed distant now, like a bad dream she'd finally woken up from. The phone rang. Unknown number. For a second, she considered ignoring it, but something told her to pick up. Hello? A soft male voice answered. Is this Emily Harper? Her heart stopped. The tone was gentle but uncertain, the kind of voice that carried both kindness and hesitation. Yes, she replied slowly. My name is Michael, he said. I think we need to talk. About Aunt Ruth, and maybe about who I really am. She froze. The name hit her like a whisper from fate. Michael, the child she never got to raise. They agreed to meet at a small bookstore cafe downtown. When she walked in, she spotted him immediately. Tall, quiet, with those same gray-green eyes that once looked back at her from the mirror. He smiled nervously, and in that moment, all the tension drained from her body. Hi, he said softly, standing as she approached. You look exactly how I imagined. Emily tried to speak, but her voice broke. And you look exactly how I dreamed. They sat for hours, cups of tea growing cold between them, as they filled in the decades stolen from them both. Michael told me about his childhood, about growing up in a family that never felt quite like his own. She told me about the quiet years, the loneliness, the marriage that turned to ashes. At one point he said, I always felt like something was missing. Now I know it was you. Tears blurred her vision. I thought revenge would fix everything, she admitted. But the only thing that healed me was finding the truth. From that day on, they began meeting every week, not as strangers, not even as family trying to repair what was broken, but as two souls learning how to breathe again. They'd sit in the park, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. Michael never asked about Ethan or Olivia, and Emily never brought it up. Some stories, they both knew, didn't need retelling. They'd already done their damage. Months passed. Emily started writing again, not in anger this time, but in clarity. Her journals turned into pages of reflection, memories, lessons, forgiveness. She began turning her story into a book, The Woman Who Walked Away. When it was published, it wasn't a bestseller, it wasn't meant to be, but every copy she sold went to a fund she created for women starting over after betrayal. She called it the Next Chapter Foundation.
One morning, a letter arrived. It was from a woman named Clara, a single mother of two who had read Emily's story online. It said, "You don't know me, but your story saved my life. I left a man who made me feel invisible for years. Thank you for reminding me that silence can also be strength." Emily held that letter against her chest for a long time.
It was then she realized her revenge had transformed into something far more powerful. It had become redemption. She bought a small bookstore soon after, the same one where she first met Michael. She called it the second shelf. The walls smelled like coffee and paper, the shelves filled with stories of survival and rebirth. Sometimes Michael would visit and help her rearrange books. Sometimes they'd sit by the window, watching the city move on, like nothing had ever happened. But they both knew the truth. Everything had changed. One evening, as she closed the shop, she took out the small brass key from her pocket, the one that used to open the house she once called home. She placed it in a small glass box on the counter, labeled simply, "The key that set me free." Then she turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cool night. The street was quiet, but she felt no fear in the silence anymore. She had spent most of her life waiting to be seen, to be loved, to be respected. But now, she wasn't waiting for anyone. She was living. And as she walked down the empty street, a soft smile spread across her face. 30 years of silence, she whispered to herself, and I finally heard my own voice. She didn't look back. There was no need to. Her past had burned, and from its ashes she'd built something beautiful, something true. If you've ever been through betrayal, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have waited this long for payback, or walked away sooner? Because sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about becoming the person they can never hurt again. And Emily Harper had finally done that.